We are here for our 7th installment of Sunday Showcase with Israel and Eli from Two Brothers Talking. How you doing today, guys?
We're good.
Doing well.
Good. Doing well. So, let's first start. How did you guys come up with the idea for your podcast in general, and what made you decide to go into podcasting together?
I'm gonna let you take this one. I feel like this is your baby.
Yeah, so I'm a huge listener of podcasts. I really love some of the ones that are already out there. There's some great ones, but I wasn't hearing any topics that really related to me, the topics that I felt like needed to be talked about. And so we're brothers. And so I pitched it to Eli. I said, hey, look, let's do something that I don't see out there. Let's do something special together, spend more time together, because we busy lives, we're both married. We've got a lot going on. So this is really our time to really spend together and just shoot the breeze while helping people. And so some of the topics that I did not feel that were being discussed were toxic masculinity. That word's thrown around a lot, but what is it? What's under the surface of that? Things like mental health. I felt that needed to be front and center. Topics like the one we're talking about today, like toxic people. What are some traits and characteristics that you can identify, spot them, and then what do you do once you know who they are? And so I pitched it to Eli, and he was on board, and so we launched it, and it was just kind of a natural name, Two Brothers Talking, because that's how we basically started. We just started a dialogue, and that's where the name came from, Two Brothers Talking.
Awesome. I love the concept of your podcast, because it really is something that we need to hear more of from men, especially.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. You kind of answered my second question of why you decided to talk about this particular topic, but to go off of that, why did you decide that that's what you wanted to do for today's Sunday Showcase?
That's a good question. I was taking a look back at some of the episodes, and that was really one that hit home for me. If in that episode, I speak a lot about experience that happened to me. There's a leader that exhibited some of these characteristics and traits, and that it really hit a nerve with me, because I was going through loss at that time, and so that was a really emotional episode for me. So I felt that was the best one for us to be able to put our stamp on and say, you know what, this is kind of the reason we started this. All of our episodes we've poured a lot into, but that was the one I could most connect to at that point in time, because of the emotional connection and the emotions elicited when we were talking about that subject. I don't know. What do you think about the episode? Why this one?
This one, I think, was one that's necessary for a couple of different points. I think everyone has relationships, everyone has people in their lives, and we like to assume that everyone in our life is going to be for our betterment, but that's not necessarily true. Whether that's a professional relationship or personal relationship, there is a value in assessing the worth of each relationship, or whether or not it's going to be beneficial to you. So I think this one really highlighted, and I said in the podcast, and I like to say all the time, this: we're not saying go on a witch hunt, like go between your friends, start voting people off the island. But we wanted to really give some tools and equip people to look at your relationships in your life, analyze them, and see, okay, are these relationships beneficial to me, or are they toxic? Am I trying to bring someone up from a toxic level? And if so, how do I do that? What steps do I take? And we try to do that with every episode. I think we try to say, okay, here's a problem that could be, and then here's some possible solutions. That way we're not just like, hey, you have a problem. Okay, have a great day.
Right. There are a lot of podcasts, I feel like, out there that do that. They kind of just throw the problem out there and then they just disappear. Yeah. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I have a couple of YouTube channels I follow that are kind of like, hey, the world's on fire. See you on Thursday.
Right.
Subscribe.
Exactly.
It's like, but the world's still on fire. Like, how do I
fix that? Yeah, exactly. No, that's great. That's great. And again, I think it's just such a wonderful thing coming from men, especially because we really don't hear about it from the male perspective. You know, we hear women doing the whole like feminism thing and then like smash the patriarchy, but like we rarely actually hear from the other side. And it's important, I think, for men to get in that conversation and to show that it's okay to be vulnerable and talk about mental health and all of that stuff.
Yeah, needs to happen.
Yeah. It does. It does. So let's get into the episode. Yeah. So you mentioned that there are about 5 signs of a toxic individual. So can you explain what those are?
Sure. So we covered 5 of them, but there's many more out there. But these are the ones we were able to pinpoint and highlight, especially in relationships in our lives. The first one is just one you typically see stemming from arrogance, that self-centeredness. That's really like everything's about me, and you can be, sharing a real big win in your life with a friend or a person you're in a relationship with, and then suddenly that conversation comes back to them. And it's not about you anymore, which you were trying to share a big win in, or even a loss in your life, maybe. But that self-centeredness causes them to really focus on themselves versus you, which is the priority at that moment in time.
At least I hope so.
Yeah. The next one is to objectify somebody. So you see someone as more as a resource that, or something you can use versus value that you can add to their life, and vice versa. So you don't see them as a human being, you see them as an object. And we typically see this played out more when men objectify women, but it often doesn't stop there. It's sometimes it's vice versa, and even more below the surface, not just sexual objectification, but more of a, I don't appreciate you and your friendship in my life, or your relationship in my life. You're just something that I can use as a means to get ahead.
Yeah.
The next one is deflecting blame. And that one is the one I highlighted and really elicited the most emotion from me. Is we see this sometimes in leadership, or even when it's peer-to-peer, when you're asked to own up for a mistake that you make. Because we all make mistakes. We're not perfect. But when you're asked to, you deflect the blame. You say, you know what? It's because of this person, or really you misunderstood me. That's the callback to the episode is, I'm sorry, you misunderstood me. And it's really unfair to the person asking you to just be honest and say, hey, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I'm sorry about that. How can we fix it? How can we get better together? And so that deflecting blame, I feel like that was the biggest one for me. Another one that kind of correlates to that is making excuses. So Eli had a great example. I want you to share it when you mentioned in the episode how someone was late, and what's an excuse versus what's a real reason.
Yeah. So the making excuses with a toxic person or a toxic relationship, it takes no ownership. It takes no responsibility. And there's a difference between an excuse and a reason. The reason may not, it may not cast all the burden on someone like, oh, my house was on fire. I'm sorry, I couldn't take your phone call. It's reasonable to think they weren't able to do that because of this reason. But there's still a level of responsibility there, where if someone's late because they woke up late, well, I didn't I woke up because my alarm didn't go off. I hear that one all the time. I didn't wake up because my alarm didn't go off. Okay, but it's still your responsibility to be on time. So in that, they're trying to take that blame and place it somewhere else. They're making excuses. They're taking the responsibility that should fall on them, and they put it somewhere else. That's in my eyes, a key indicator for someone who's toxic, because one prevalent thing for a toxic person, as we kind of work through these 5, you see it over and over again. It's all about making sure I'm comfortable. And we've seen it with leadership in different companies we worked for. We've seen it you can see it almost anywhere nowadays. I've had the frustrating experience of working with people who just absolutely refuse to admit they're wrong. And at the end of the day, they go to sleep like a baby. And I think that's one of the most frustrating things, is like, you're so wrong. But they're not willing to take the responsibility of that one, and making excuses is really passing the buck and making everyone else's lives miserable.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Yeah.
I saw right.
Saw that Tom Hartman said, I think we all have them in our lives. And yeah, it's easy to spot them now that you know what you're looking for.
Yep.
You can be like, oh, wow, yeah, that person might be maybe toxic. I don't know. That last one is disloyal, and it really is unfortunate, when someone cannot remain loyal when somebody else comes into the picture. So an example we used was when there's a two people like me and Eli hanging out, and then someone else enters that, arena, and all of a sudden Eli's no longer my friend, or we're no longer connected. It's all about that other person. And if that other person is bringing in maybe some conversations that are negative towards Eli, some gossip or what have you, instead of defending that friendship and saying, you know what, I know Eli's character, that's not right, or hey, I don't want to hear what you have to say because that's totally false. You're like, oh yeah, Eli made me mad the other day, and I see what you're saying, and he's this and he's that. And so that disloyalty really can tear apart a relationship in conjunction with these other four characteristics.
For sure. Do you feel like maybe that first one, that it's all about me mentality, the kind of narcissistic attitude, did you feel like the other traits kind of stem from that it kind of all comes back to that ego and that selfishness?
Sorry.
No, you're good.
They definitely do. If you look at most of the negative traits of a person, it's usually because they're so focused on themselves. They can't see past that.
Yeah.
It's like when, we've seen in TV shows, and we kind of like, oh, that's silly, because we laugh at it because it's so ridiculous. But someone's walking by like all these terrible things happening, and it happens to cross their path, and like, oh, woe is me. When really like the whole world around them is going through a really tough time, but because they're inconvenienced, now it's a problem.
Right.
And most things that are focused on yourself, it's going to be toxic to other people. I mean, if you think about the most me point in a person's life is typically when they're a baby. And I'm not saying your babies are toxic. Don't like throw them out or anything. But if we think about like a child, the child's whole world is what? It's help me. I need this. I want this. And, you hear all the time how, parents don't sleep because it takes a lot of energy to be with someone like that. And when you're a child, it's okay. But as you grow up, the hope is that we become a little more focused on the things around us, and it can come from either a lack of maturity, just a lack of self, realization, or self awareness. But most toxic behaviors come from a self-focused lifestyle.
Right. Yeah. We actually our next Psyche Saturday, we do a little segment called Psyche Saturday, and our next one's actually going to be about narcissistic personality disorder. So perfect. I mean, people are constantly saying there are particular people that we know of that are high profile people who have this kind of egocentric view. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they have a personality disorder, but they have those traits. And I would agree with you wholeheartedly that that everything has to come back to me. Everything has to circle back to me. It's my way or the highway kind of thing is the main reason why a lot of relationships don't work out. Yeah. And so it's really part of the main thing of any sort of toxic relationship. In the episode, you guys talk about not only intimate relationships but work as well. And a lot of times, especially with the higher ups, they tend to have a little bit of that control because of that, and they have almost like a power struggle. And Israel, I if you want to touch on the story that you had mentioned in the episode, because that, I mean, when I listened to it, I found myself like I could feel my face kind of going like, who does this?
Yeah,
but it does happen quite often, unfortunately. So tell us a little bit about that.
So setting the stage, a few years ago, our aunt passed away from a preventable cause. She went to the hospital with some gastritis issues, and ER doctor ended up deciding to do a procedure, spinal tap, that caused her brain to shrink into spine and swell, and she had to go fly out to Phoenix. So her scenario began to deteriorate pretty quickly. So what went from just visiting her aunt to the hospital ended up to counting the days that we had with her. And so I had a conversation with my leader. I was a first level leader. They were above me. So I had 16 folks underneath me that I was responsible for. And so knowing that responsibility, knowing as a leader, you're responsible regardless of what's going on around you. I had a conversation with my leader and said, you know what, this is what's going on. Our family is unique. We're very close knit. And so when something happens in our family, we want to make sure that we are there for each other. And so this is a dynamic that we've had for a while. And so it was even more important for me to be there, not only for my aunt, but for my mom, but my siblings, my father, everybody involved. And so I had that conversation with my boss, and we were in agreement that, you know what, I have paid time off. That's what it's there for. Use it when you need it. Make sure, you know, your team is covered. Make sure everything that they need is taken care of, because they still need a leader as well. So I squared away all the details, and I began to do that. But as the week progressed, her health just took a dive, and the doctors told us she has maybe a couple of days. So you really need to maximize the time you have. Kind of distance between our city, which is Yuma, and Phoenix is about 3.5 hours. So I did not have enough paid time off. So I was driving up after work. I got off about 3:00. We drive up, and then we drive back as late as possible, still giving me a chance to get some rest. I went to work at 5 a.m. And so that was working fine. But there was a situation to where they told us, okay, this is her last day. So we were up there. We drove back the next morning. I talked to my boss and said, you know what, can I take off tomorrow? I don't have paid time off, but if you're okay with it, one of my coworkers, we can switch our off days if that's okay with you. That way, you know, I'm still working a day, but they're covering me tomorrow and I'm covering them, you know, the next day. She agreed 100%. And then, so I went, you know, after work, we drove up. It was about 9:00. We were sitting there, and we were, you know, of course, it's emotional time. And then I get a text from my leader saying, you know what we agreed to, I misunderstood you, or you misunderstood me. You can't do what you were going to do. You can't switch your days off. That's not going to work. You need to be here for work. And so I texted back, you know what, this is what we agreed to, copy and pasted kind of the message we had, and asked her, did I misunderstand, you know, what you had said? Is this okay? If not, you know, let me know what I can do, because this is really important for me to be here. My aunt's going to pass away probably tonight. And so that was tough for me to begin with. And her response was, I don't know what to tell you. Get your priorities together, and let me know what you decide. And so that was heart-wrenching in itself, because here's a leader I trusted, and I communicated the best way I could the need that I had. And as a leader, if someone on my team communicates their needs, I'm going to do everything in my power to help them, move heaven and earth to help them, especially when there's a circumstance like this. And so that's the least I expected, but that response was really heart-wrenching. And to be honest, I was getting ready to, you know, say, you know what, I'll find another job when I get back. I need to be here for my family. But my dad, he's a wise man. He said, you know what, son, you've got responsibilities too. You can't deflect the blame, because if you decide not to go and you lose your job, I guarantee you're going to blame that leader. And that's not what a leader does. They don't deflect blame. They take responsibility for their actions, their decisions. So I drove, we got into town about 2 a.m. and I went to work at 5. And the first thing that they told me, they didn't stroll until about 9:30. They walked up to my desk and said, Israel, what are you doing here? And that really was off-putting, because they knew what I was doing there. They had told me basically I had no choice but to be there. I'd lose my job. And so that was another heartbreaking moment for me, because here I am already in an emotional state and doing my job, because that's my responsibility. And then the leader that already told me to get my priorities together comes in and tells me, you know, oh, what are you doing here? And when I explained what I was doing there, her response was, I'm sorry, you misunderstood me. Not, oh, I misspoke, or I apologize. It was, you misunderstood me, and then walked away. So that was, oh man, that's the epitome of deflecting and blaming. That was really a tough time for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one of the things about that situation too is it's like leaving a bunch of car crashes in your wake and just driving home as if nothing happened.
Yeah.
Because I guarantee you that person's never thought about it again, which is, I think, one of the most frustrating parts for me is like we have a lot of older folks that drive in our city here in the winter. And I've had people just stop in the middle of traffic, just take a picture or something, just things you shouldn't do. And one of the worst parts about it is they can leave car accidents behind them and keep driving because they never know what's going on behind them. Mm-hmm. So it could be in so much pain behind them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the worst things about people who deflect is they're leaving all this pain and anguish behind them, and they don't even know what's going on because they don't care to look around.
Yeah,
right. And like you mentioned earlier, they can sleep at night because they don't realize that they're even doing that, or even if they realize it, it doesn't seem to be a care for them.
Yeah, it's like a self-5. All right, let's go to bed.
Right. Yeah.
Right there, buddy. Yeah.
So, would you say that those are the ways to specifically spot somebody who is toxic? Would you say that they kind of need to have all of these characteristics versus just having one?
I would think several of them will likely apply because they come from the root of being self-centered. I think several of them are probably going to apply, but I would add a caveat that if you listen to the podcast, you'll notice that both of us have been we've both been a little toxic at times. I've been toxic. He's been toxic. So a person being toxic does not mean that that's the entire picture.
Yeah.
And I want to be clear on that someone being a toxic person, to a certain degree, that doesn't mean that that's all they are. Some of the people we talk about, no, that's pretty much the whole picture. But you know, there are people who have toxic behaviors, and there are toxic people. And so I want to add that caveat because, again, I want to be a champion for no witch hunting.
Yeah.
Don't go for your boss, but like, hey, guess what? Turns out you're toxic. I quit, and then come back and like, well, two brothers talking said I could just quit. Well, that's not what we're condoning here. But there's a difference between, I'll just kind of melt that down to this. There's a difference between people who are toxic and toxic people. And the difference being the degree to which they add toxicity to your life, I guess is the best way I can conjugate that. So you'll likely find at least one of these characteristics at times in most people, whether that's because they're doing it on purpose or because it's just something they do accidentally. But as these start to add up, as you have more and more of these characteristics, typically they're changing from a person who's toxic to a toxic person.
And I think it has to do with your ability to be honest with that person, and have a candid conversation. And we talked about this kind of in the episode. We like to give tips to solve the problem we just uncovered. And that is something that I did in this instance. I met that leader, where they were. And I said, hey, this is how your actions and your words, what they did to me. This is what was discussed. This is what was agreed. So we had a candid conversation. And the reason I was able to walk away from that conversation, knowing that it wasn't just a mistake that they made, and it wasn't just, a lapse in judgment. No, this was a series of behaviors and decisions this leader had made. And this was just really the latest one that had taken place, the most, like the cherry on top, have you. And so once I had that conversation, and it was very clear that self-centeredness was, I didn't do anything wrong. Israel, what are you talking about? That's how he was able to separate their just toxic behaviors and them being an actual toxic person.
Mm-hmm. So if we have toxic people in our lives, would you recommend removing ourselves from that particular relationship?
That is a difficult question to answer, only because the circumstances are going to be so specific and so case by case. I'll give an example of, my childhood to a certain degree was not the greatest. I'll just toss that in there. Add some salt to it, like that. What's the guy on the Instagram?
I don't know what his name is. But
Salt Bay. Salt Bay.
There you go.
I thought it was like doing this. Add some salsa to it. one thing that I saw growing up, and not only, you know, in my house, but in other houses, was very toxic relationships, whether they be emotionally abusive, physically abusive, what have you. And one of the worst things I ever heard wives who were beaten say was, "I'll change him. He loves me. He did it by accident." And there's a difference between an accident and decision. The first time it's an accident. The second time it's a decision. If I go down the street and I get mugged, I got mugged. If I go down that street again, I'm choosing to be mugged. And I kind of put that in there, again, being that we're not the experts here. We're not by any way, shape, or form life gurus. We don't have all the answers. I'm not tossing out gold nuggets of wisdom here. But if there's a healthy, responsible way out of a relationship that's toxic, that might be the best avenue for you to take. We've had people in our lives who were very, like, they were around to get something from us. That was their only reason for being around. So, you know, probably not the best person to spend all of our time with. People like our bosses, sometimes you can't escape that toxic person just because, you know, our electric bill does not take IOUs. So we have to have a job. We have to work for people that we may not enjoy being around. That being said, we can mitigate that relationship as much as reasonably possible. But a lot of that has to come down to evaluation of the relationship, what steps you can take to work around it. And I would very much advocate a support system because nothing happens in a vacuum. And nothing should happen in a vacuum. So we have a fantastic support system. We have, you know, our father, a pastor, who has a wealth of experience and wisdom we can draw from. So if we come up against something that's like, hey, should I leave this relationship? I can go to that person and draw on that experience, as opposed to making a rash decision that's just going to really cause more problems later. And in some cases, what we may perceive as a toxic relationship, we have to understand that what lens are we looking through, and is that itself toxic? And what I mean by that is, I've been toxic before. So I may look at a very beneficial relationship as toxic simply because I myself am being toxic. It's all about Eli. So I have to kind of determine, is Eli being the toxic one here, or the other person? So I struggle to draw with too wide of a paintbrush on that one, just because it's such a case-by-case basis. And for us to just say, oh yeah, totally get out of that relationship, I feel like we're going to be causing a lot of heartache.
Yeah, I think that if you have that kind of conversation and you bring up the behaviors, the next step that we gave in the episode is to have patience. So let me separate this. If there is domestic violence and that type of abuse, sexual, physical, emotional, mental, that is not the toxicity we're talking about. That is, get help.
Yeah.
Get help now. The toxicity we're talking about is simply the friends, the boyfriends, the girlfriends, the bosses that are exhibiting these toxic behaviors, that it's contributing negatively not only to your life, but to your mental health, sometimes to your physical health, because of that added stress, to where you're dreading any interaction with that person. That's where you need to really take a step back and evaluate through the right lens. Have that kind of conversation, and then give them some time. Eli has, had conversations with me. I've had conversations with him, and we've got to give people room to grow. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it should be expected if you're going to maintain a relationship. And so you give them that time. If they say, hey, you know what, I'm going to change and I'm going to do my best, then you give them some time to do that. Now, how much time is that? That's up to you.
Yeah.
Because if you're expecting them to grow, then you should see some elements of change. They might make the mistake again, but it's not going to be the same way it was the first time, because if they care about you, they're going to change some of the things in the way they think and the way they talk. And so they might catch themselves mid-sentence. You know what? Oh, I apologize. We talked about that. So give them some room to grow. And after that set amount of time that you've determined, then take action. That's when you need to say, you know what? We had this conversation. You said you were going to do this. Thank you. You changed. I saw the growth. Or, you know what? This relationship, this friendship isn't two ways. It's a one-way street. And until you can contribute to this friendship, this relationship, I can't put myself in the same situation. I can't put myself in the same predicament. I need to take care of myself. And so until you are able to contribute, I don't think we can be friends, or, whatever the relationship status is at that point. But those are the three kind of steps that we've taken and that we shared as recommendations. Have that conversation, be honest, don't hold back, don't be rude about it, but be candid. Say, hey, this is how I felt, this is what I thought, this is what I did as a result of the conversation. And then be patient with them, because change isn't easy. As we all know, it takes some time. And then take the action that you deem is necessary.
I like that phrase you use, the get out versus, like, because there are different degrees to your point. There's different degrees of, like, some of them just, no, you need to remove yourself from that situation, and others, we talked about in our friendship episode. I think one of our friendship episodes, we talked about friendship is an investment on both sides.
Yeah.
And it has to be a give and take on both sides. It can't just be, I'm going to be your friend, but you can't be my friend. Like, right. You're going to give to me, but I'm not going to give to you. And we always equate a lot of relationships to our marriages. And I think I heard this on like a talk show or something. I don't remember. They said, like, marriage is 50-50. It's like, well, no, it's 100-100. Like, you have to give everything you have, and they have to give everything that they have. And friendship and most relationships need to be the same way. It can't be, like you said, just one giving, the other one taking.
Absolutely.
That's a bank transaction. That's not friendship.
Yes. Well, I mean, you kind of equated earlier to kind of being a commodity for some toxic people. So, to kind of say it's a bank transaction, it kind of brings it all back to that too. So if you are seeing that you're having a friendship like that, maybe you need to reevaluate if that's truly a friendship you want to be in.
Yeah.
So with that, you mentioned you can kind of choose when it comes to relationships and friends, whether you can leave, but with work, it's a little more difficult. So say you have a toxic coworker or a toxic boss, and you've had this conversation with them and you've expressed your feelings about particular situations, but nothing's being done about it. How would you suggest someone go about continuing their work relationship with this person? So
I'll tell you what I did in my circumstances, and I can kind of share the avenues that I've seen. If it's the type of toxicity like sexual harassment, that's HR conversation. Go to your HR partners, go to a leader above that leader, and someone that's trusted, and have that discussion. But if it's something similar to me, where it's just not a good person, that doesn't have that sensitivity to people needs, I started looking for another role within my company. I love the company that I work for, because I saw that there was really no future in the professional relationship with that leader. And that's what someone can do if they don't have the option of maybe transferring within the same location they're at to another leader. I looked elsewhere, and when I started looking for culture. So the leadership culture, I started having interviews of my own with people that worked in that part of the organization, saying, hey, what's the culture like? What's the leadership like? When you have something going on in your life, what's the sensitivity level to that? What's expected of you, and what's expected of that leader? And having that ability to have that full dialogue versus just trying to jump ship really is more healthy, because then you can make an educated decision and you're not based in emotions. At that point in time, I was still with that leader for another year after that. And so that just shows you, I didn't try to make an emotional decision. After my dad talked me off that ledge, I said, you know what, I do need to take a step back, have some self-awareness on my part, and plan this out. And so it took a year of planning and, having discussions with other parts of the organization, other leaders. And I can gladly say that I'm part of a same company, different part of the organization, where my leader is exactly what I was looking for, exactly what I needed. He understands when you have, something going on at home, you take care of that. And then when that's sorted out, take care of the things that we need to take care of. Or, hey, check back in. You mentioned this was going on. How's that going on? How's your family? How's your, whatever's happening in your life? Be quick to come back to making sure that you're okay, not just, hey, can you give me an update on that project? Can you give me an update on what you're working on? But hey, first things first, how are you doing? Like, how's your family? How's your wife? How's your daughter? I know you mentioned something. I think our camera just died right now. I just saw it flash off.
Yeah, that's all right.
But
We can still hear you.
that's what I, that's what I did. And that's what I do definitely recommend if that's something that someone is debating on what to do, is if it's something like sexual harassment or like border like abuse from that leader, have an HR conversation. That's more than just toxicity. That's abuse. But if it's really something that's just, they just don't have the ability to have that an emotional intelligence to see that there's a need there, there's a human on the other side of that conversation, then I recommend looking elsewhere and doing your investigation, doing your research on an organization that can give you that culture that you need.
And I would say even during that time, one thing that I know that you did during that time while you were looking for an alternative, make sure that you are being the best employee you can be during that time. And the reason I say that is because it's not something that comes, I think, natural to us when we've been slighted. A lot of times we try to, we can kind of pull back into ourselves like, well, if they're going to act that way, then I'm not going to give them 110%. Understand that, your character should not be sacrificed because someone else's character is poor. And that really has to be that self-worth that we carry and say, you know what, just because they're going to have a toxic and a narcissistic life doesn't mean I'm going to pull back from being, a rock star on my team.
Absolutely.
Because, I know you were still a great leader. You still had a team that respected and admired you. And they still worked hard because you worked hard. And it can be tempting when around toxic people to be toxic in retaliation or toxic to others, and just kind of cast that blame and say, well, I'm acting this way because my leader. Well, no, you get to choose how you act. So making sure that, yes, you may be around people who are less than great. We've all had those people that we just kind of feel like it's a cheese grater against our face. But in reality, I still own my own actions just as much as they own theirs. So ensuring that we are carrying our own weight and making sure that we're doing our best, because that's, at the end of the day, that's also going to assist us in finding something else. To your point, we moved to a different part of the company because our company's great. But if I am looking for an alternative, I don't want the last thing out of my employer's mouth is to be, well, yeah, but the last 6 months they've been terrible.
I think that's important, right? You have to have some marketable skills and the ability to market yourself as a candidate. And because that's the thing that our company does, they do great is they check in. So the hiring manager reached out to our leadership staff where I was coming from, and they asked, how's Israel's performance? And that's important, because that's very tempting to just give up and say, you know what, you're not giving me what I need, so I'm not going to give you what you need. And that's a level of immaturity that I feel like we all have the ability to live into. But it's important to have some self-awareness, as we mentioned, and be willing to resist that temptation and give it your all. I guarantee you it's going to come back to you. It's going to be paid forward by your next adventure, whatever you decide to do. I guarantee you give it your all, it's going to come back, and you're going to be blessed because of it.
It's going to be hard.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. No, definitely. You mentioned the culture thing, and I think that's such an important point that especially now people really need to start looking at when they go into the workforce. Would you recommend to people who are like, just coming out of high school or just coming out of college, getting their first jobs, do you think that that's something that they should ask in interviews when they are going for like their first jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. That's so I was a hiring manager for a period of time, and I'd always tell the candidate, ask questions, because just as much as we're interviewing you, I want you to interview us to see if we're a good fit for you. And that's something I didn't learn right off the bat. It was something that through experience, unfortunately, since instances like this really taught me. And so if you're coming out of a high school, college, or you're entering the workforce for the first time, or even looking to change the environment you're a part of, really sit back and think, what do I want to see in an organization, whether it be values, whether it be benefits, or even culture, and ask those questions. Don't be afraid. I can tell you from experience, I was just blown away when candidates came prepared with more questions than like, how much am I going to get paid, or do I have to work weekends? But they were asking about, okay, what's the culture like? If there's something going on in my life, what's the response from leadership, and just things that you would not normally think about in a workplace, but you would expect. That's something that you need to take a step back and really do some investigation into the company, look at their website, and then ask those questions, because that's going to really set you up for success to where you will feel valued as an employee and not just a number.
Yeah.
Definitely.
You're going to be spending a lot of hours at work. You do not want to be miserable that entire time. I mean, I remember some of the jobs I had as a kid. I chased, I need money because of XYZ, which, we all work for, for reasons that we need money, right? If they just stop paying me today, I'm probably not going to keep working where I'm working. But you have to be willing to look at, okay, is this work going to be my job, or is this going to be my life? I've worked in places where I worked, 1,000,000 hours a week and was always stressed out, was always tired. And at the end of the day, if that's the culture I'm working on and I'm working with, I don't want that in my life. So you have to be willing to investigate that thoroughly. I was part of a internship program with the company we work at, where we took kids fresh out of high school. I mean, they graduated on Friday, we hired them on Monday. And one of the biggest things that I saw was a lot of the high achievers, those who'd volunteered and those who'd poured themselves out into, different projects and different things to get their resume up, to get their records up, and to make sure that they look good for colleges. One thing that they all lacked, and it was universal, was very few of them had any emotional maturity or emotional endurance. And what I mean by that is, when stuff got hard, they didn't communicate, they just quit.
Yeah.
And one thing I would say a lot of that has to do with is, setting that expectation when you're going into a job. What kind of things am I going to be facing? What would you say is your hardest day at work? And that's a question I love to ask, is what's the hardest day you faced at work? Because that's going to tell me what level am I expected to achieve? What level am I expected to perform at on a daily basis? And not to the detriment of any of these kids, because these kids, this was their first job, so they never really kind of faced that kind of stress. But you have to understand that there are going to be expectations at work that you're going to be held to. But to his point, we have to make sure that we're holding work to our expectations. We don't want to just go work at insert retail or fast food company here because I need a job and come home miserable every day. Because one thing that can turn us into, kind of going back to our first point, bringing this all around circle, is now we're going to be toxic to our family.
Yeah.
And I have worked with people who, they're just worn out from the day, so they go home and they yell at their kids because they're too stressed out to deal with their kids now.
Yep.
Like, well, now we've come full circle. Now I'm toxic, to my family, as opposed to dealing with finding a better job to begin with.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Fantastic advice. We're actually coming to a close. So do you guys have anything else you want to add to this topic?
I think it all starts with self-awareness, with yourself first. So that same measure of I guess, or lens you could use to look at somebody to evaluate if they're a toxic person, look at yourself first.
Yeah.
And have that candid conversation with yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, Israel, you're kind of self-centered. Here's some, examples. You kind of objectify people, you deflect blame, I make excuses, and you're disloyal. What are you going to do about it? So have that conversation with yourself first, or even be willing to open it up and get some trusted people. And Eli touched on it before, but we talk about this a lot on the podcast, is have a group or a circle of friends that you can trust to be honest with you, and collect that group of people and say, okay, this is going to hurt, but tell me, what you think about my character. Where are my flaws, my blind spots? Ask them to be honest and open with you, give you that feedback. Being willing to do that will give you so much more clarity then you start looking at your relationships. Because if you're doing it, it's not really fair of you to ask somebody else to stop, because now you're just being hypocritical.
Yeah.
So if you start with that conversation, that self-awareness, you're going to be in a better place. And more likely than not, you might have less people that are toxic than you originally thought, because you were able to clear up some misconceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would also actually probably check the perception you have or the attitude you have when going to interact with certain people. I heard a long time ago from I want to say his name was Zig Ziglar or something.
Zig Ziglar, I think.
Zig Ziglar. He gave an example of a woman goes to work, and she doesn't like her marriage, she doesn't like her coworkers, nothing. And he says, I want you to go every morning, every night, look in the mirror and say, I love my husband, I love my job, I love my paycheck. And at the end of the day, it wasn't the coworkers as much that were the problem, it was her attitude. And part of that kind of self-reflection that Israel mentioned, that self-awareness, is what is my attitude? What is my perception of what I'm going to be doing? And how can I have that self-control to not make what could be a difficult situation even more difficult? So use that measuring stick on yourself, definitely, and then make sure that you're not using that measuring stick to beat people with.
Yes, definitely.
Don't get self-righteous if you happen to be someone who has, a non-toxic personality, because that itself is toxic.
Oh, yes, it is. It is. You're absolutely right. All right. So where can everybody find you?
So we're on pretty much every major streaming platform: Apple, Google, Amazon, Anchor. You can find the podcast there. We're going to start streaming on YouTube here for season 2. November 2nd is our launch. So you can find the link to that on our Facebook or Instagram pages, Two Brothers Talking, or on Twitter at Two Brothers 2020. And then, of course, subscribe to that YouTube channel as we push out content, getting ready to launch. It's going to be exclusive to that YouTube channel. So just get ready for that.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I'm sorry that your camera cut out midstream, but this was fantastic. And I am so happy that I got to be the host of this one. It was such a pleasure talking to you guys and hearing your opinions and your advice on this topic. So thank you so much for being involved and for doing our Sunday showcase.
Hey, thanks for having us, Sarah.
Absolutely. Have a great night, guys.
You as well.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks.